March 18th, 2026. I woke up in the middle of the night last night, and it was on the news feed. It was something about Joe Kent, but I ended up, just looking him up a bit, and yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about him, man. But he is one of the few, not one of the many. That's something that I kind of felt, from him. He's one of those rare individuals that can he can exist in multiple places. And what I mean by that is he can exist in the light, the dark, and then also the gray. He is, or was, as of recently, the director of the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center. People label him as a right-wing Trump supporter, but this man is led by his soul and an internal system of values and morals that he refuses to betray. And I don't know how anyone cannot both admire and respect that about him, The fact that he's standing on those morals and values and knowing when to step down from something when it doesn't align with him, when it completely just betrays, what he's about. I think it does speak to who he is as a person. And he's a very strong individual too. This is a man that's been through many things over his lifetime. His career military. He also served time in the CIA, the paramilitary. It's kind of crazy, that people would attack him, in such a way. What I do see is that people are just using him as fuel to get to Donald Trump. You know what I mean? Which is something that it kind of disgusts me in a way, but it's nothing that I wouldn't expect. You might see him in the public eye right now because he stepped down from his most recent position and resigned, over the Iran war, in which he stated that Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States. Which I saw a lot of people, say within news feeds that he said that they didn't pose any threat. He didn't say that. He said no imminent threat, meaning there was no action required right at the moment. There was no planned, coordinated attack that was going to happen here and now. And I think what he meant by that was that this war could have been avoidable. You know what I mean? A full-out war like this could have been avoidable, and American lives could have been saved. There's already been American losses on our side. And that's human lives. That's human lives that you can't get back. Why this is so directly related to this is this man lost his wife due to a suicide bomber while deployed to Syria. So this man has real-world experience when it comes to knowing the cost of war and the toll it takes on American families. He knows, He knows the toll that it takes, and he's had to carry that, and he's stood up for his morals and values. And he said no, he said no. It's extremely impressive and powerful, for him to take a bold move like that, to resign. But it's something that I completely back. I'm trying to stay objective here, but it can be hard to do because on the other side of this, you have the president, publicly bashing him pretty much. And it speaks to the character flaws of the president. There's a lot of toxic masculinity. And one thing that I noticed that he always does is that you have to show undying loyalty to this individual. And if you don't, he will completely write you off. He will talk bad upon your name. He will try to devalue you, and it's nothing that a good leader should do. It's nothing that a president should do, especially given a man like Joe Kent, and the experience that he has under his belt. You would think that you want someone like that to give you advice as far as the moves that you should make as far as getting into a war, you know? Man with real world experience. Why wouldn't you? I feel like there's so many people that oppose this war, and I think why they oppose this war is because there is no clear defined reason, you know? And they continue to dance around and say that, you know, there was this threat and blah, 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 but there's even people within his own cabinet that are opposing this war. So it tells you that there is very much so a high debate, you know, as far as whether we should have done anything or not. It also speaks volumes when our allies don't come to help us, you know, in the Strait of Hormuz, you know, for example. I know the president asked for help and he wasn't given it because they weren't consulted before the operation took place. Why would they? You know, why would they? I mean, that's simple reciprocation. You know what I mean? Give people information, let them know your moves so you can align with other people in case you do need help. Strategically, it didn't make sense to me, you know? And I know that there's a lot of, you know, propaganda, and I don't know how much of it is true, but Israel, you know, might play a pivotal part in weighing in on us getting involved with Iran in the first place, you know? It makes me wonder, you know, how much Donald Trump and the president is being manipulated, you know, by certain individuals. You know, I also wonder, and I think about his age, you know, he's 80 years old. It got me in this thought process the other day, you know, not only should there be term limits as far as these political officials, but there also should be age limits. Like, are we for real right now? This is what we're doing? I mean, we already had a geriatric motherfucker that was in there the last term who couldn't even solve a third grade math problem. And now we have somebody that's pushing 80 years old, you know, and pretty much the CEO of America. What are we doing? Is that a smart move? Like, do we not have anyone better within the United States that can represent our country? It just doesn't make much sense to me, you know. You can argue the point that an 80-year-old man has an enormous amount of wisdom, you know, but I don't really see that in the president right now. That's not something that he's continuously highlighting. I think what I see now is a lot of division in the country, you know, and even his base. He's completely lost his base, which in my opinion would be extremely important to him. You know, another thing that I've noticed from him is that he gets extremely offended when people disagree with him about anything. And it could be something small, and he gets extremely offended. He very much so cares about what other people say about him. And I don't know if it goes back to this term, you can't be humble in the jungle. That might be where a lot of his energy comes from, you know, always thinking that he's in this fight. But you have to remain humble. You have to be in a position like that, even though you're the CEO of America. You have to be willing to learn, you know, willing to learn, willing to grow, willing to take advice from people that are experts in their field. And I just don't see him doing that, you know, in a lot of different situations. And it saddens me, because I wish nothing but the best for any president that sits and stands for us. You know what I mean? As Americans, I wish nothing but the best. You know, I can go back in time and think when Biden was president, and I was hoping that he was going to be doing great things, which he didn't, you know, but I always hoped for it. You know, I always prayed for it. And I think that's how a lot of Americans feel, you know? No matter who is the president, no matter how you're politically affiliated, They want them to do well because they want the country to do well. And I just don't feel like we are currently doing well, you know, not only as Americans, but society in general. You know, you could think about the economic ramifications of this war and how it's affecting, you know, just gas prices. Gas prices are climbing astronomically. And that's not good for American families, man. It doesn't matter how semi-permanent it might be, because they don't have a clear ending to this war. They don't know. What I pray for and what I hope is that it doesn't turn into a prolonged military engagement, you know, much like Iraq and Afghanistan did. And I think we all know the amount of lives that were lost unnecessarily. It just, it doesn't sit well with me. Getting back to Joe Kent a little bit, you know, people might think from an outside perspective that he attaches his identity to a political ideology, but I truly believe the opposite is true. You know, with Joe Kent, and his last move that he just made kind of speaks to that. You know, it kind of reflects that. He stepped down from a very, you know, important position, one that he was absolutely perfect for, and he stepped down because he couldn't back, you know, those type of moves. But I think that's the problem, you know, with many other individuals, not speaking about Joe Kent, but many other individuals, you know, political figures. When you attach your identity to a political ideology, you know, and you don't let your soul carry you and guide you, it can have, you know, astronomical ramifications, you know, very poor ones, you know, one in which your identity is completely broken down right when you have that political ideology kind of fall apart, you know. And I know he was political in nature, you know, Joe Kent, you know, in recent years. But I don't think that he attaches his identity or his energy to that, you know. He's able to use the power of disassociation and completely step away from something like that. But I have no doubt that within him, you know, he feels a little shaken, you know, and a little bit betrayed by the president, because I know that the president promised and he pretty much campaigned, you know, not for war, but against war, you know, for peace. And the opposite is being shown to us right now. And there's a lot of people within his base, not just Joe Kent, that feel betrayed, you know. You can see it on that right side of the political aisle right now. There's a lot of people shaken. There's a lot of people questioning, you know, their allegiance to the president and the moves that he's making, because it seems unnecessary. It seems a bit unwarranted. Let's get into Iran a little bit, you know. Do they pose a threat? I think absolutely. But do I think that they pose an imminent threat? I do not. Again, I'm speaking from an outside perspective. You know, I don't have classified information, but I imagine that Joe Kent did. You know, he had a lot of information, especially in the position that he was in. And someone who has spent their whole life, you know, their whole adult life, mastering warfare. I think that his opinion would matter way more to me than 98% of individuals out there. But do I think that they pose a threat? Iran? Absolutely. But again, I think I agree with Joe Kent on this one. It's not imminent. You know, it's not imminent. Yeah, withdrawing support of people who you have disagreements with. So we saw this in the president, and I kind of touched on this a few moments back, but this is something that I just truly don't agree with. We as humanity have to find a way to humbly disagree, yet keep unity together. You know, we have to realize that it's okay to disagree with people. You can have different opinions. That's part of free will. You can't be angry at someone because they disagree with you. You can't completely write them off, especially after they show so much support for you, your cause, what you stand for, what you said you stand for, and then completely withdraw your support for that individual. That kind of blows my mind, and it seems childish in nature. You know, when I think about it, it's like a little child, you know, that doesn't get what they want. You know, Daddy, I want a piece of candy, and you don't give it to them, and then they completely withdraw from you, and they throw a tantrum. You know, it's a very childish move. It's ignorant. You know, it's very ignorant, and I don't like seeing that. You know, especially from someone who is supposed to be an American leader. Anyone who does this, I don't appreciate. You know what I mean? I don't appreciate that energy. I don't appreciate that type of treatment of other individuals that simply disagree with you. There is always room for healthy debate. Always. But again, this is something that the president does on a consistent basis, and it definitely repulses me, you know. Again, I wish nothing but the best for any president that is representing our country. I do. You know, I wish that there could be perspective shifts, you know, but I feel as if now it almost goes back to that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I feel like the president has been operating in such a way for so long that I don't think there's very much room for perspective shifts or change and understanding, you know. So therefore there's no growth. And I think if you have watched me before, you will understand that growth is extremely important to me. And I think it should be important in everybody's life.